Okay, Russia is today, in fact, celebrating the 20th anniversary of its constitution. Historians say that the average lifespan of constitutions adopted after World War I doesn't exceed 12 years.
Yeah, so it appears that Russia's main legal document has stood the test of time. Prime Time's Medina Kochnova, well, she's out waiting for us in the cold. Thank you so much for waiting indeed, Medina. Tell us, first of all, what were the most drastic changes to the constitution in the last 20-odd years?
Good evening, guys. It is indeed very nice to hear you there. Right, now the current constitution of the Russian Federation was adopted by the national referendum on the 12th of December back in 1993, and it replaced the previous Soviet-era constitution of 1978. Now, as we all know, the constitution determines the fundamentals of the state system, as well as the rights and freedoms of its citizens. And indeed, as you just mentioned, many legal experts now started to know that Soviet and Russian fundamental laws, or meaning the Constitution, stood the test of time, as the average validity of the Constitution in various countries, especially after the Second World War, had not exceeded 10 years. Now, just to give you an example, in France, for instance, the Constitution was adopted back in 1958, and right after that, it has already been amended 18 times. Now, Sergei Shakrai, who is one of the creators of the current constitution, believes that the document is not outdated, but on the other hand, the document is quite mature. Now, let's listen to some of his comments.
The average age of constitutions introduced after the First World War is 12 years old. If we take into account all of history, including the American Constitution, the average age is 17 years old. Russia's constitution is 20 years old, meaning that it's mature, but not outdated. A constitution is an attempt to found the ideal state. There are no outdated articles in the constitution, at least no articles that cannot be tweaked by constitutional law. Changing the constitution now would create a whole raft of problems. It was in 1993 that lawmakers made 400 amendments to the Constitution, and both the Constitution and the country collapsed.
Still answering your question, there has been indeed a number of changes brought to the current constitution, and the latest was being made back in 2009. Particularly, I'm talking about the change in the presidential term. Now, the presidential term at that time was increased from 4 years to 6 years, and as well as the term of the State Duma deputy was also increased from 4 years to 5 years. Now, these are perhaps the most drastic changes that were made to the current constitution.
Still, there's also been a number of recent proposals aimed at changing the constitution, right?
Well, there is a number of proposed changes, and first of all, I would like to mention that the Speaker of Russia's State Duma suggests that there should be a special exam on the knowledge of the current constitution being installed, and that exam should be applied to different government officials. However, such a proposal still does not lead to any changes being brought to the constitution, and at the moment, only foreigners that are aiming at obtaining a Russian citizenship they have to pass this type of exam on the knowledge of the Constitution. Now, again, Sergei Shakrai, who, as I mentioned before, is one of the creators of the current Constitution, believes that such a step is still quite necessary.
I like the American attitude towards the Constitution. You can hear and learn about it anywhere. Teachers take school children to the National Constitution Center. In Russia, there is no such place. So I created an online museum dedicated to our Constitution, and it's being launched today. It contains 5,000 pictures as well as videos and document scans. There's no building yet, but at least there's this site now.
Now, again, as I said, there has been a number of proposed changes, speaking of which there was one made by the State Duma deputy, Elena Mizulina. Now, the deputy suggested to mark a special role of orthodoxy in Russia within the country's constitution. However, still this proposal has not been met with a lot of support coming from other governmental figures. Now, speaking again of the change changes. There might be several changes implied within the constitution, as just recently Russian President Vladimir Putin has submitted a draft law to the State Duma, under which there is a massive merger of two Russia's courts. I'm talking about the Supreme Court and the Arbitrage Court. Now, if such a merger takes place, then that move will lead to some changes being brought to the constitution.
Let's put politicians to one side now. What do the ordinary Russian men and women think of this document then?
Right. Well, if we compare what ordinary Russians thought before 20 years ago and now about the Constitution, well, there is quite a drastic difference. Now, speaking about what the picture was 20 years ago, now at that time for the Constitution stood 60% of the 55% that actually went and voted for or against the Constitution. So 60% out of this 55% stood for the Constitution. Now, as I said, the picture is a little bit different. Now, a large number of Russians, actually somewhere around 20% of the population, don't really know the content of this document, but more than 50% of Russians don't really want any changes to be applied within the Constitution, and overall around 64% of Russians haven't even read the text and the Constitution, and only 14% of Russians can say that they do know the text of the Constitution quite well. So this is where what the picture is nowadays.
All right, thank you for the update. Our correspondent Madina Kochnova.